Good morning, everyone. I recently came across this piece of news on a computer, an article. Don't know why it popped up in my feed, but I read about this 60-year-old bottle of whiskey, single malt whiskey, that was on auction. And guess how much this bottle brought? It broke all previously held records. This 60-year-old bottle of single malt whiskey sold for 1.9 US million. 1.9 US million for a bottle of whiskey. I don't even drink whiskey. I don't know about you guys. Maybe you would appreciate whiskey and whether it's single malt or not. But even then, I wonder whether you think whether it's worth, any bottle of whiskey is worth 1.9 US million dollars. Well, there's several reasons why, according to the article, why this bottle of whiskey costs so much. One is there are not many bottles of that left. Number two, that bottle also was designed by some world-famous Italian artist. So the bottle itself had some value in it, had some creative value in it. But another reason why it was so expensive is because it's a single malt whiskey. So yep, I know this is a weekly devotional. We're not talking about whiskey here. But let's just talk about this a little bit. I'm no professional when it comes to whiskey, but I read a little bit on single malt. Why is it so difficult? What's so special about it? And I found out that to have a single malt whiskey, it's a lengthy and difficult process just to come up with a whiskey that's single malt. And therefore, with the limited number of bottles, the artistic value of the bottle itself, and the fact that it's a single malt whiskey, all contributed to it costing or fetching 1.9 US million dollars. I thought the idea of how that single malt being a difficult and lengthy process was an interesting and insightful one, for me especially. Let's just think about singleness. Let's just think about being single-minded, being very focused, being driven by just one thing and one thing alone, this single thing. And the Bible does talk about that. Well, not single malt whiskey, but being focused with just one thing in mind, one single thing in mind. I read to you one verse that's found in Matthew chapter 6, and it's one of those verses that sometimes when we read it, we go and scratch our heads and wonder, what is Jesus talking about? And it's this verse. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 22, Jesus says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. Verse 23, but if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. Now, what in the world is Jesus talking about here? What's this thing about eye being healthy? Well, that's where single comes in. You see, the word there for healthy, and in some other translations they use different words, but the original word there in Greek carries the idea of being simple and single-minded, very focused. And in the light of Matthew chapter 6 and those few verses in the context, Jesus was talking about storing for ourselves treasures in heaven or on earth. And then he says this in verse 21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And then he talks about this thing, about the eye being the lamp of the body. If your eye is healthy, in other words, if your eye is single, if you are focused on not treasures in heaven as well as on earth, but you are singularly very focused, simply focused on just having treasures in heaven, then your heart is pure, your motivation is right. And when that happens, this single-mindedness, when that happens, then your whole body will be full of light. Why? Because you're focused on the right thing. But if your eye is bad, if you're focused on more than one thing, you're not single-minded, then your whole body will be full of darkness, which means then we are focusing on all kinds of treasures, not just those that are in heaven, but also all these treasures, these distractions that are on earth. So with that, I pray that we all be reminded to be single, to be focused on what God wants us to do. And that is to build and to store up treasures in heaven and not on earth. So people of God, let's all be single-minded. God bless you all.